The crew of Captain James Cook are likely the first Europeans to ever witness surfing when the HMS Endeavour sailed past Tahiti during the summer of 1769, though Dr. Ben Finley, a Harvard-educated Pacific historian, suggests that Proto-Polynesians had been surfing for thousands of years or so. It was a kid's game except on Marquesas, Tahiti, Hawaii, and the Cook Islands and New Zealand, where adults also rode waves. Only Tahitians and Hawaiians rode while standing, though, and only Hawaiians turned surfing into a national obsession starting around 1500 BCE. It's a romantic tale that adds color, maybe even a little bit of depth. Surfing was an activity of great kings, of conquerors. It traveled across the mighty Pacific from point to point as if by magic on the wings of men and women who felt the ocean with their bodies, with their souls. It is a beautiful ancient dance, and the surfer, a beautiful ancient dancer. Passing the International Surf Museum, I see a strange surfboard. Written in bold font, it says, "Surfing in Peru, 4,000 years. I freeze and feel the blood draining from my face. Did surfing actually start in Peru? Didn't cocaine? Shit." The Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl, you see, came up with a seemingly wild hypothesis in the 1940s. He believed that the pre-Incan race from Peru that first populated Polynesia, he believed that it was a pre-Incan race from Peru that first populated Polynesia, that they had somehow sailed thousands of miles across the Pacific and set up camp, that Polynesians were Peruvians a few thousand years removed. The scholarship of the time was conclusive. Polynesia was first settled from China downward and westward, and it was absurd to believe anything else. But Thor was a romantic, and he had heard an Incan legend that suggested that white-skinned people once lived in Peru, and they were ruled, is this being romantic or racist, bro? And were ruled by the sun god named Kon-Tiki. They built magnificent stone structures and were very modern, but, as happens, were attacked by a group of bearded white-skinned people and brutally massacred. Ask anyone who lives in Brooklyn or Venice about this regularly occurring phenomenon. Kon-Tiki managed to escape with some of his closest friends, and they made it to shore, which was ugly, cold, and perpetually shrouded in mist. Then pushed out to sea and were never seen again. When the Spaniards first came to Peru, Heyerdahl unearthed some notes suggesting the ruling Incans told their new guests that the magnificent deserted ruins were built before their time by white gods who had fled westward across the Pacific, never to return. So he ends up building a replica raft. Thor dug up any bit of information he could on Incan rafts by reading early Spanish accounts and studying archaeological evidence. In 1947, he and 5 brave Norwegian souls pushed off from Peru's shores on a balsa wooden raft they had named the Kon-Tiki. After some 101 days and 4,300 nautical miles later, they smashed into the Tuamotu Islands, Tuamotu Islands, Polynesian Islands, coincidentally with amazing surf. They filmed the entire adventure and won 1951's Academy Award for Best Featured Documentary. More importantly, though, he proved that it was very possible for a trip of that magnitude to be made. I mean, many things could be true at once. You could have had a raft from Peru and China settling in the same place. But what was life like in ancient Peru? If it was true, if they were the first to settle Polynesia, what did they bring with them besides whiter skins and sweet potatoes? What were they doing besides building magnificent stone structures on the shore? Oh, they were surfing, but they were surfing, of course. They were surfing. It should be with gusto. Surfing without palm trees, without blue water, without rainbows, without beauty, and probably knit hats. Surfing since the very beginning of time, maybe even 3000 BC. Getting Stoke on thousands of years before any footprints, Mormon or other, scarred Polynesia's rose-colored sand. Surfing just like they were in the International Surfing Museum's window. They discovered drawings of little horses too, cabalitos. The cabalito was not a flesh and blood actual little horse, but rather a boat made up of a bunch of reeds, maybe 6 feet long, square at one end and flipped up on its other, like an extra chubby surfboard. Peru's fishermen have been using the cabalito since at least 3000 BC, should be BCE, to fish, to move goods between coastal villages and surf, and to surf at least 1,000 years before the Polynesians. To be fair, their surfing consisted mostly of cruising the shore break to the beach after the day's fishing or moving goods. But there are ancient ceramic sculptures of Peruvians perched on their cabalitos. Did these pre-Peruvian fishermen bring surfing with them when they set out across the mighty Pacific thousands of years ago? Is this the heart of surfing? And if an ugly, cold coast is the heart of surfing? Now he's talking to a legitimate surf historian, which he establishes there is such a thing. Surf historian pushes back some. No, it's just that the fishermen coming in from a day's catch, he's saying they're not surfing, it's just fishermen coming in from a day's catch and laying their paddles down to ride a wave in thinking, oh, this feels kind of good. It's like if you had to ride your bike home from work every day and the last 2,200 yards of your ride is downhill to your driveway. That's awesome. I'm done with my job now. Let's just put my feet up on the handlebars, horrible idea, and ride the hill. I guess surfing needs to be something more, or at least it does to me by definition. It needs to be its own thing. You're designing a craft for surfing. You're going out into the water to surf. That's where I would draw the distinction. If you're talking about where we come from, obsessing about surfing and standing up on waves and boards, my gut tells me that there's no other way that it makes sense except for it having come from Hawaii. But I see his heart is not in this explanation. And then he talks more about the surf historian, has written, demythologizing the sport, in fact, was another great goal of mine. I couldn't wait to sledge away at the cheerleading and boosterism, I might have got that one wrong, and perjured nobility layered onto most of the surf history. Pulling down the shoddy historiographic handcraft is, by itself, I admit, pretty satisfying. But the real purpose, the real pleasure, comes from the fact that the mortar ground level of events, almost without exception, is more compelling than the legend or the myth. I wish I could listen to my gut like Matt, who's the surf historian. Intention has nothing to do with it. Riding a wave is surfing. Riding a wave is surfing. It is a simple scientific definition, the most pure essence. Intention has nothing to do with it. And yes, Polynesia is gorgeous. So any stumbling shallowness grown there, I think he's meaning in terms of historical BS, can be forgiven. Meaning it's easy to romanticize Polynesia because it's beautiful. Peru's coast, again, is not beautiful. It is not beautiful by any definition, either scientific or romantic, ugly, cold, perpetually shrouded in cold mist. And if it was not beauty that stole the surfer's eye, then what is it? And this is where it departs for me, because being out in the cold and ugly is enough. I'm glad to be alive, so blessed. It Men have suffered lesser fates than being on the cold and ugly Oregon shore. But just reading the text, although I don't agree with it, but maybe he's trying to situate himself historically 3000 BCE. Maybe it was a more sort of visceral thing. So it's like, he can imagine surfing in Polynesia because it's pretty there. Why would you go surfing in Peru? He answers, ugly, cold, perpetually shrouded in cold mist. And so if it was not the beauty that stole the surfer's eye, then what was it? I will tell you, it was cocaine. And the world's most endearingly degenerate love story just turned into its oldest. I am the one destined to write it. And if I write it right, it will make surfing great again. Oh, sounds too mega. Because surfers everywhere will have to admit exactly what they are. They are not soulful dancers or athletes or sportsmen or watermen. They are addicts. We are addicts. I can't relate. And if we all admit that we are addicts, then surfing, I hate that whole thing, adrenaline addict. It's like, no, it's an aesthetic pursuit, a physical practice, some sort of attempt at self-improvement, however futile. It's just, sure, it's going to be mediocrity, but that's better than not being able to do something at all. If we can all admit that we are addicts, then surfing can shrug off the thing that is holding it down. It can shrug off the staid conservatism from the Disney and NFL executive vision and free itself from the apocalypse. I mean, I get the sentiment that he doesn't want the conservatism, but there are ways to be cool, without partying or whatever. I can't sit here listening to the Seattle atheist anymore. I have to run like Jonah in the Bible. It is time to accept my fate. I am a surf journalist. So yeah, it's this sort of thing where it's like, yeah, if you're like giving this to a kid that's going to take it seriously, obviously this is bad. But if you're reading it as humor and he's just this old man screaming into the void but articulately and in a funny way, it's pretty good. It's pretty relatable. And it is an interesting thesis. And it is interesting that if you launch a raft from Peru and everything goes right, you'll just end up right in Polynesia by the currents, I suppose.